Welcome, everyone. We are here today to provide you another Arizona Attorneys Respond informational video. We have a series of about 5 videos now where we're offering legal information to the public. And what we do is we get volunteer attorneys to help answer your questions. We've done a series on landlord-tenant issues. We've done a series on, needing to find out what legal resources are out there. And today we're focusing on the criminal side of things. We've all maybe had some interaction with police, and we want to make sure that you know what your rights are. So today we've invited attorney Robert J. Campos of Robert J. Campos and Associates here in Phoenix. He's going to answer some questions for us regarding what do you do when you have interaction with police, whether it's that you're pulled over, whether they show up at your home, whether you might have been drinking a little bit and you get pulled over and accused for driving under the influence. So those are some of the things that we're going to talk about. So feel free to look at the watch the entire video, or you can fast forward to the part that you feel is most important to you. So with that, we're going to welcome Robert, Mr. Campos. Thanks for being here with us today. We know that this is going to be an important resource for the public.
Well, thank you for having me.
Absolutely, absolutely. So before we get started, you are a certified specialist. And what that means is that you have gone above and beyond the regular standards or the typical standards of having your license here in Arizona as an attorney. We'll get more into that, but it's important for people to know that you have options when you're hiring an attorney. You can dial into the State Bar's website. You can give us a call if you're looking for an attorney. And again, there's different levels. Like Mr. Campos here, he has gone above and beyond, and he's a certified legal specialist with the State Bar of Arizona. So with that said, Robert, we're going to go ahead and dive into this dialogue here to helping the public. So let's talk about what should people do when the police shows up at their door. They have no idea what's going on. Perhaps it could be a parent and somebody shows up at the door, or they might have a house guest that is being looked after by police. What is it that you would recommend to the public?
All right. Well, you specifically asked about the house, and so there are certain rights that a person has in their home. Okay. For one thing, you don't have to open the door. And if you have a metal door, screen door, it's best to leave that shut. You can open your door a little bit and ask the officer why they're there and what they want. You do not have to allow the officer inside the home. The officer may say, "May I come in?" And a lot of people want to be cooperative and say yes. I always recommend that you say no. And you ask the officer if they have a search warrant to enter your house or an arrest warrant to arrest somebody that they think is in your house. Sometimes they need both. Sometimes they need a search warrant and an arrest warrant. They won't tell you that. So they will ask you if it's okay if they come in because they are asking you for consent. If a person gives voluntary consent, then the police do not need these warrants. So I always tell people, say no very politely and ask the officer if they have any warrants. If they do not have any warrants, keep the door shut and tell the officers that you are not going to allow them in. So you have those rights to say no. Now, if you want to invite the officer in your home, you may do so. However, the officer will always be looking around to see if he or she can find evidence that you may have committed a crime. So if you have some drugs that you forgot that you have, or a gun, and you are on probation and are not allowed to have a weapon, this officer is taking all of that in. So by allowing the person in your home, you're allowing that officer to use their vision and to see whether or not there's obvious evidence that you might be committed a crime, and they could arrest you for that reason.
So you're thinking, being polite, you have nothing to hide, nothing that might be associated with the specific reason they're there. But once you give them that consent, they go in, kind of look around. You might have consumed something that you shouldn't have, so then they can get you on that, even instead of a separate reason from their initial visit. Am I right?
That's absolutely correct. So the officer might be there for any number of reasons, and sometimes they make it up. The police have the right to lie to you, and they do, and they will. So they might say they got a complaint that there was too much noise. Can they come in? And you think you have nothing to hide. There was no fight, and so you allow the officer in. Now the officer says he smells marijuana or he sees marijuana, and then he asks, do you have a marijuana card, and have you been smoking marijuana, or sees some cocaine, and then asks you about that. And that's how people get in trouble when they think they've got nothing to hide and they're going to cooperate. So I always tell people it's just best to say, no, thank you, officer. I'm not going to allow you in unless you tell me that you have a legal search warrant, an arrest warrant that gives you the authority by a judge to come into my house against my will.
That's a great point. That's a great point, because you think about that, living in perhaps in an apartment complex, you might have the music up too loud and your neighbors complain, police come out, but that's really they're there for a noise complaint. You're just getting yourself into trouble for something else. So that's definitely a great point. Thanks for sharing that. And I think that it's important for that example, because it's as simple as that. You don't have to let them in. They're there for something completely different, and unless they have the legal documentation, don't let them in. Great point. What about we're going to kind of transition into the driving side of things. I'm driving down the road and I'm going 10 miles over the speed limit, because even 1 mile over the speed limit gives them the opportunity to pull you over. So let's talk about what I need to do if I'm pulled over by police.
Well, if you're pulled over police, and these rules apply to every situation when you have contact with the police. And I always tell people to keep these in mind. One, always be polite. Okay? Always be polite. When you're polite, that helps you. The other thing is you have to assume that you're being recorded either by somebody else with their cell phone or the officer with their body camera. And later on, if you get into a legal dispute, you want to be able to be seen as reasonable and polite. Nobody likes a citizen that immediately is being rude to the police officer. So one is be polite. The other thing is do not resist physically. Even if you are legally correct, you're not going to win the battle on the side of the road. The officer will use force and aggression, and you can be hurt. So even if you think you are right, do not ever physically resist a police officer. Obey all commands. Even if you think the officer is wrong and you are 100% correct, and you might be, but that's for you to litigate later on in a court of law in front of a judge. Obey commands. If the officer tells you to get out of the car, get out of the car. If the officer tells you to put your hands on the steering wheel, put your hands on the steering wheel. If the officer tells you not to move around, don't move around. Obey commands. Now, if you feel that your rights are being violated, you can tell the officer orally, officer, I believe you're violating my rights. I am not agreeing to this. I do not agree in getting out of the car. I do not agree to you searching my car. At the same time, though, you are physically obeying the officer's commands. So he could tell you, step out of the car, and you can say, officer, I do not want to step out of the car. Are you ordering me to step out of my car? Yes, I'm ordering you to step out of the car. Get out of the car. Okay, because even if you're right, the officer is likely to pull you out of that car and you're going to end up hurt.
So, Robert, real quick, because what's the difference now? You bring up a great point. What's the difference of you being in your home compared to being in your vehicle? Because when you're in your home, you can absolutely say, I'm not letting you in, go get a warrant. But now you're in your car, that's your property, you're inside of it. What's the difference between being able to say no to someone that's at your door at your home compared to saying no when they're at the door of your automobile?
That's a great question. Your home is considered your castle. And the Constitution of the United States and Arizona's Constitution gives you greater rights when you are in your home, okay? When you're out in public in a car, you still have rights, but they're not as great of an extent as when you are home. So you have lesser expectation of privacy under the law. That's really the issue. You have a greater expectation of privacy in your home. You have greater rights, but not out in public, and certainly not in your car. Without getting technical, the Supreme Court has issued a long history of cases about your rights in a vehicle. Because a car can be driven away and you're mobile, the state, the police have greater rights to detain you for a brief period of time, greater rights to invade your privacy. At the same time, though, you are always free to say, no, officer, I do not consent. I do not agree. Do you mind if I search your car? Just about everybody says yes, even though they don't want to, because they think they have to say yes. You should absolutely say no, even if you have nothing to hide, because sometimes your significant other left some marijuana or some cocaine or some meth or a gun. You didn't know about it. The officer searches, finds it, and you are going to get arrested for possession of whatever item that's illegal that's in your car. Even if you say it's not yours, it's still considered constructive possession, and you can be charged and arrested for that. So I tell people, when the officer says, can I search? You say, no, thank you, officer, I do not consent. And he asks you, may I search you? No, officer, you may not search me. Again, they may do a outside cursory pat down, and they may or may not have the legal authority to do it. But don't fight the officer. Don't physically resist. It's just really good enough to say, no, I don't consent. And later on, if the officer finds something and you get charged, a lawyer can really help you when you've asserted your rights. And that's really the issue. A lawyer cannot do much for you if you waive all of your constitutional rights and agree to speak to the officer, agree to searches, then it's virtually impossible to defend you at that point. So people
Gotcha.
who through the system understand, assert your rights.
Gotcha. So just to recap, if you're pulled over, you might have been speeding, you might have swerved, whatever the case may be, you got pulled over. At that point, you provide them with a polite disposition, and you give them what they're asking for in terms of your license and insurance. Outside of that, there's nothing else that you need to provide them permission to do. So you don't have to get out of your car. You don't have to let them search your car or your person. So that's definitely great information for folks that are watching today.
But if they order you to do something, do it anyway. Just orally say, I don't agree, okay?
Gotcha. So if they're pulling you out of your car, but make sure that you verbally say, I'm not agreeing to the fact that you're pulling me out of the car.
Correct.
Gotcha. Great to know. Great information. Now we're going to move on to the DUI. So, you know, I went to happy hour after work because I hadn't seen one of my colleagues that, you know, got a new job, had a couple drinks, get pulled over. I feel like I'm not breaking any laws. I'm going the speed limit. What happens when you get pulled over and they allege that you have been drinking?
The first thing the officer is going to do, I can bet you all the money in the world, the first question is going to be, have you been drinking? Okay. And what I tell people is, do not answer any questions. You have the right to say, officer, I'm not going to answer any questions without my attorney. That stops all questioning. Now, if you say, well, should I talk to an attorney? What do you think, officer? I'm thinking about talking to an attorney. That's not good enough. You have to be very concrete and direct and say, I want my attorney. I'm not answering any questions. Lying to an officer is a crime. And sometimes the officer can't arrest you for that DUI. He doesn't have enough evidence, but he can make a case that you lied. And some people might give a false name, false date of birth. It's very common. People get afraid. They think they might have a warrant for something else. They think they have a problem. They didn't pay child custody. They lie. So never lie to a police officer, but you also don't ever have to answer questions. So when pulled over and you think, it's a DUI investigation, the officer is going to ask you, have you been drinking? When you've been drinking? How long ago? And how much? And you don't need to answer those questions. You can say, officer, I want the assistance of my attorney, and that stops all questioning. So the number one rule is don't answer any questions.
And let's say you don't need the attorney at that moment. So let's just say I don't have Robert J. Campos in my phone to be able to say, hey, Robert, I just got pulled over. With that, it buys you time to then be able to talk to an attorney, right? They're not going to say, okay, well, go and talk to your attorney now. I think that's another point that we should probably talk about is if you do have access to a Robert J. Campos in your phone, you also can tell the police officer that you want to make that phone call in private, correct?
Absolutely. Now, the law absolutely gives you the right to ask to speak to an attorney. The officer must let you speak to the attorney if it does not interfere with his investigation. Now, what that means is up to a judge to determine. But the key is at every point, say, I want to talk to my lawyer. Okay, do you mind doing these field sobriety tests? I always tell clients, don't do them. You don't have to do those balance tests. They're very subjective because it's the officer testing you, all right? Now, if you refuse to take any blood, breath, or urine test, your license will be suspended by the Department of Motor Vehicle for 1 year for refusing. So I generally tell people, do the test. We can fight about the legality of that later on, okay? As a general rule, but every situation is different. That's why you should ask to speak to an attorney. You have the right to ask to speak to an attorney before making a decision whether or not you're going to give a blood test or a breath test or a urine test. And you should ask that first thing. And your point about having Robert J. Campos on your phone is an excellent one. You should have the name of an attorney and an attorney's phone number in your cell phone so you're able to call somebody right away. Even if you're in jail, they will allow you to use your phone to make a phone call. If you can believe it or not, they still have old phone books in the jail. And if you don't have your cell phone or a number of a lawyer, they give you these really old phone books for you to try to locate a lawyer. And we're talking about really outdated information. So yes, it's very good to have a lawyer's phone in your cell phone and to ask to speak to an attorney.
Great. So just to recap, when you're pulled over, you know that you've had a couple drinks. You do not have to answer one word regarding your disposition. To to not necessarily buy you time, but to keep your rights safe and intact, you say that you want to talk to an attorney. You call your attorney, you make sure that you let the police officer know that you want complete privacy, because they can, if you don't say that, they can over here you say, hey, I did have a couple drinks, but what do I do? That's something that can be used against you as well. And then we're talking about not taking field sobriety tests because it's subjective based off of the police officer, and you don't want to resist taking a blood or urine or breath test. But isn't there a way to kind of buy time by saying you want a third party test?
Well, it doesn't necessarily buy you time. And again, the key under the law is that it doesn't interfere with the officer's investigation. So, the officer has to let you make that phone call at a point where he or she believes it's not going to impede their investigation. So they're going to get to a point where they say, okay, now you can call a lawyer. But yes, you should, call the lawyer and ask for the lawyer's advice as to your next step. Every case is different, but a lot of times I'll get a client on the phone and he is clearly drunk. There's no other word for it. He doesn't know who he is, where he is, or anything. And so my advice to that person might be different to somebody who's absolutely stone sober and tells me, I had half a glass of wine, an hour ago with dinner. I don't know why this officer is conducting a DUI test. So generally, though, my advice is take the test, but ask for the lawyer. And as far as buying time, the officer needs to give you reasonable time to contact your lawyer and talk to your lawyer. Is that 2 minutes? Is that 10 minutes? Is that half an hour, an hour? It depends on the situation, but it has to be a reasonable amount of time to allow you to contact somebody.
Great. And again, your lawyer is going to provide that guidance.
Correct.
So again, like you said, based off of the lawyer's experience and knowledge and being able to gauge your situation, they'll make the recommendation on how to proceed with engaging the officer.
Yes, and then you did say something. You do have the right to ask for your own independent test and go get your own blood test. And nobody knows how to do that, where to go, So when you call the lawyer, he may have some good suggestions on where to go and what to do. But sometimes you're arrested in the middle of the night and there really isn't anywhere for you to go to get an independent blood test. So although you've got that right, as a practical matter, it can be difficult to do. But those are issues that the lawyer who's familiar with these DUI stops can talk to you about.
Gotcha. Well, this is all great information. Before we talk about you being a certified specialist, let's go ahead and kind of touch on the important factors of knowing your rights. So when police show up at your door, if they don't have the correct legal paperwork, the warrants, you don't have to let them in. Continue to be polite. If you're pulled over because you were going 10 miles over, give them the information that they're asking for. That's identification, and that's proof of insurance. But you don't have to answer anything else. You definitely don't want them to have access to search your vehicle or your person. So that's just a basic being pulled over. And then the third would be, if you're pulled over, you thought you might have been drinking. Again, assert your rights. Tell them that you don't want to take the field sobriety test. Ask them to speak. Ask them for the opportunity to call your lawyer in private, and then allow your lawyer to guide the rest of that process. Does that sound about?
Yes, and I always say, be polite to the officer and obey commands. You can say, I don't consent, but obey commands. That's why you see so many people getting hurt, because they just don't obey commands or they're not polite.
Gotcha. So if you're watching this, make sure that you know your rights, the rights that Robert just outlined for you in any situation, but always remember to be polite.
Yes.
Right. Okay, so Robert, let's talk about certification. Why do you believe that it's important for you as a licensed attorney in Arizona to have that certification for your clients?
Well, it really protects the consumer because there's so many attorneys, and you know, if you have an eye problem, you go to an eye specialist, you go to an ophthalmologist. If you have a foot problem, you go to a podiatrist. If you have a heart problem, you go to a heart surgeon. And the law now is so specialized that there's no such thing as a general practitioner. Somebody who does car accidents doesn't know anything really about criminal law. Somebody who does criminal law may not know anything about car accidents. So you want somebody that specifically works in that field. At least half of their business or focus is that field, criminal law, and a certified specialist has to pass a background check by a committee, has to pass an ethics check. So ethically, you have to have, you know, a very good record with the state bar. You have to have the experience. You have to have experience in trials, in motions, in appeals, in appearing on behalf of clients. You have to take a specialized test, another test, given by the state bar, and you have to pass that test. You're also peer reviewed. So your colleagues who know you, judges and other lawyers, get contacted and they're asked about how you interact. And do you know the law? Are you professional? And are you polite? You know, are you somebody that we can recommend that will do a very good job for you and is an ethical lawyer and is qualified. So if you hire a certified specialist, you know that person has been vetted, is ethical, and has complete command of that subject.
Absolutely. And that's really important because, as you know, or maybe you don't know, but there are over 24,000 lawyers licensed to practice in Arizona. And
Too
like,
many.
definitely a lot. But it gives people options. So I think it's important for them to know what their options are. Do they have to hire a certified specialist? No, they don't. Can they hire somebody that's just, graduated? Absolutely. But specifically when it comes to criminal law, I'm not trying to endorse anyone as somebody that works for the state bar, but, at least the public will know that people or that lawyers that go through the certification process have that extra knowledge, have the endorsement of their colleagues, have the consistent education that keeps them on top of that practice area. So I definitely think that that's a win for a client in the specific type of practice, criminal law. So congratulations for that, because it does take a lot of work on your behalf to maintain that certification with the state bar. So it's definitely, I bet, a great feeling to know that you have been certified because you worked hard for it.
Yes, and when you're certified, that means you've made all the mistakes in the world already. You've learned from your mistakes. So hire somebody who's already learned and has the experience versus somebody younger, less expensive, who's learning. You may be the first case they've ever had in that subject matter. They may not tell you, and they're learning along with you. You don't want that. You don't want a surgeon who's doing their very first open heart surgery. You want somebody who's been doing it years, and you're their 100th or 200th patient. Same thing with a certified specialist. You're likely dealing with a lawyer who's handled hundreds, if not thousands, of matters similar to yours, is known and respected by their colleagues and by judges, and knows what they're doing. So that's really what you want when your life is on the line.
Right, right. And to be fair, because of the different practice areas that we have, all lawyers start somewhere, right? So you were all at that one point where you had your first client, you had your second client. So it's kind of been that experience for every single lawyer, whether they're certified or not. They have to build that rapport. They have to build that experience. But again, You know, it's like you said, life or death experience or situation calls for different types of experience. So with that being said, Robert, do you have anything else to add to make sure that folks who are watching this know their rights? If not, we'll, you know, give you our thank you, and we'll end the session. So anything else that you'd like to say?
Just emphasize, be polite, assert your rights. The Constitution is there to protect you.
Great, great. So thank you again, Robert, for spending some time with us today. I do want to thank the Arizona Foundation for Legal Services, the Arizona Bar Foundation. They are a great partner of ours. They are a resource for the public where they can go and get free legal help if they need that. Again, you as a consumer, give us a call. If you need to hire an attorney, we can give you that attorney's disciplinary background, if any. We can let you know how long they've been practicing. If their education is important to you, we can tell you where they got their education. So give us a call. We want to make sure that you guys are informed consumers. That's why we're doing this series. We're here to help you. We're here to protect you. And if you have a complaint against an attorney, you can also give us a call, because we want to make sure that attorneys that are out there providing legal services are living up to the ethical expectations to maintain their license. So with that being said, thank you again for tuning in. We hope that you learned a lot in this Arizona Attorneys Respond video, and keep an eye out for the next series that'll be coming out soon. So Mr. Campos, thank you again. We appreciate your participation in this series.
You're welcome. Thank you.